Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics on Channels Television. I'm Millicent Walker. On the news this hour, hopes of convicted former Plateau State Governor Jolly Nyame getting a Supreme Court review of his 12-year sentence dashed today as Apex Court affirms ruling. President Buhari set to lead Nigeria's delegation to the 29th African Union Summit of Heads of State and Government slated for February 9 in Ethiopia. And deregistered political parties kick as Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) delists 74 political parties. Welcome everyone to the program. Well, let's start from the Apex Court in Abuja, where the former governor of Plateau State, Mr. Jolly Nyame, lost an appeal seeking a review of the Court of Appeal judgment sentencing him to 12 years imprisonment for breach of public trust and misappropriation of public funds. The Supreme Court, however, ruled that the appeal court has no right to impose the fines, which summed into hundreds of millions of naira. The Supreme Court therefore set aside the fines while affirming the sentence handed down by the Court of Appeal. The former Taraba governor had appealed the November 16, 2018 Court of Appeal judgment that upheld his conviction by an FCT High Court, which had earlier sentenced him to 14 years in prison. The appellate court had reduced the sentence to 12 years imprisonment, but ordered Mr. Nyame to pay a fine of 495 million naira for alleged misappropriation of funds while he was governor from 1999 to 2007. President Muhammadu Buhari will depart Abuja today to attend the 33rd ordinary session of heads of state and governments of the African Union, AU, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. President Buhari will join leaders from the 55 member countries of the African Union to participate in the summit with the theme Silencing the Guns, Creating Conducive Conditions for Africa's Development. According to a statement from the President's media aide, Mr. Garba Shehu, the President will attend several forums which will precede the 33rd ordinary session of the Assembly. In Nigeria's capacity as member of the AU Peace and Security Council, President Buhari will participate in the high-level meeting of Peace and Security Council on the situation in the Sahel and Libya, and also high-level ad hoc committees on South Sudan. On the margins of the summit, the President will deliver a keynote address at a high-level side event on Stop the War on Children, Dividend of Silencing the Guns, an event co-sponsored by governments of Nigeria, Uganda, and Norway, and Save the Children International. To all the stories now. Will the decision by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, to delist 74 political parties be the beginning of a journey to electoral reforms ahead of the 2023 general elections? Well, INEC Chairman Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, he explains that the Commission took the decision after reviewing the performance of political parties after the 2019 general elections.
The National Assembly amended the Constitution to empower the Commission to deregister political parties on the following grounds. 1. Breach of any of the requirements for registration as a political party. 2. Failure to win at least 25% of the votes cast in one state of the Federation in a presidential election, or 25% of the votes cast in one local government area of a state in a governorship election. And 3, failure to win at least one ward in a chairmanship election, one seat in the National or State Assembly election, or one seat in a councillorship election. In order to implement the provision of the 4th alteration to the Constitution, the Commission carried out an assessment of political parties to determine compliance with the requirements for their registration. Similarly, following the conclusion of the 2019 general election, including court-ordered rerun elections arising from litigations, the Commission was able to determine the performance of political parties in the elections. In addition, they were also assessed on the basis of their performance in the area council elections in the Federal Capital Territory, which coincided with the 2019 general election. It should be noted that FCT is the only part of the country where INEC is empowered by the Constitution to conduct local government elections. Consequently, the Commission has determined that 16 political parties have fulfilled the requirements for existence based on Section 225A of the 1999 Constitution as amended. Accordingly, 74 political parties are hereby deregistered. With this development, Nigeria now has 18 registered political parties.
Well, also at that meeting, the INEC chairman fixed September the 19th and October the 10th for the governorship elections in Edo and Ondo states. Well, with a number of reactions from Nigeria's political space, and this is over the deregistration of the number of political parties by INEC. We make sense of this development. Joining us now is the national chairman of one of the deregistered political parties, Allied Congress Party of Nigeria, ACPN, Mr. Ganiyu Galadima. Thank you for joining us. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Also there is indeed Mr. Rotimi Oyekomi, Chief Press Secretary to the INEC chairman. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, we have joining us via Skype a senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Yemi Candidate Johnson from Victoria Island in Lagos. Thank you all for talking to us at this time. I must begin with you. And I mean, INEC, this is going to Mr. Galadima. Now, INEC says you didn't meet any of the conditions, and hence your party and other parties, 74 other parties, have been deregistered. Did you expect this?
Well, that is not true. The claim by INEC that we didn't meet the condition is not true. The condition for the existence of the political party is as set out in Section 221 to Section 229 of the Nigerian Constitution, including the Section 225 amendment that was recently inserted by the National Assembly. If we look at that provision of the Constitution, Section 225A, that was cited by the INEC chairman, the conditions were spelled out thus. You must win, it was spelled out that you must have a geographical spread, which is one of the conditions for a political party to remain as a political party. You must have offices and people in at least 24 states of the Federation and FCT. In addition to that, you must have a national headquarters, which we did. We have fulfilled the two conditions. In addition to winning election too, we have won election. In Ondo State, the ACPN won 10 councillorship elections. Out of these 10 councillorship elections, we were denied 9, leaving 1. And as I speak with you, today in Ondo State is the primary election of our party. For us to participate in the coming local government election in Ondo State. And for the election, a lot of people have applied. We have candidates that are contesting all the positions in Ondo State. We have even paid to OCH. Our people have paid to OCH. We have paid nomination fees. We are contesting for chairmanship. To us, it was a dream aborted. And the deregistration by INEC was in bad faith. It is unacceptable for us. In addition to this, in addition to fulfill all these requirements, it's the fact that we are in court against INEC in respect of the November 16 governorship election in Bayelsa and Kogi State, where we were unjustifiably denied participation by INEC. The matter has...
We have an INEC representative, and you've said a lot of things. You've come from different angles. Let's hear from Mr. Oyekomi on some of the issues you've talked about.
Okay.
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, I want to disabuse the minds of this gentleman and others who may have the same feeling that we carried out the exercise to punish political parties. No. What we simply did was to give effect to the fault alteration of the Constitution, Section 225A, as stipulated by the Constitution and as spelled out when the INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yahu, gave a press briefing yesterday. So to that extent, you just look at the conditions set out by the fault alteration, and we carried out a verification in December last year. We went to all the political parties, we asked questions. We did this individually, and it was based on the responses that we harvested from them that we compared with what is in the fault alteration that made us arrive at that decision. And of course, just like the INEC chairman noted, one political party took us to court challenging that action and asking the court to prevent INEC from deregistering it. And because of that, because we are a law-abiding institution, we are staying action until the final determination of that case. So it is not intended to punish any political party. That is one. Two, the only local government election that INEC is empowered to conduct is that of the area councils of the Federal Capital Territory. It is the state electoral commissions that conduct the local government elections in the state. So we cannot base our decisions on the elections of the local government in the state, but on the FCT, and this was also stated.
All right, we have Mr. Candidate Johnson joining us, perhaps to give us a legal perspective. You've heard the sections 221, 229 adduced by Mr. Galadima, and then there's 225A of the Constitution that's talking about the fourth alteration. Has INEC done the constitutional thing, or would you say there's an infringement somewhere?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for asking me a question that is specifically legal. I'm not so sure that it's helpful for your listeners to have an analysis of the law. What I think is a bit more important is that INEC has purported to act under a power which undoubtedly exists, but the allegations of bad faith and the complaints of lack of credibility highlight what is even more important than the strict provisions of the law, and that is the deficit, the huge deficit of trust and doubts as to the competence under which INEC, which is a body supposed to be independent and impartial in competence, and who has been entrusted with administering one of the most significant aspects of our democracy, is suffering and operating. Of course, the record of INEC on a variety of issues have lent credence to that lack of reputation and credibility. So I'm not surprised. But bigger than that problem, to my mind, is the fact that the policy of electoral regulation and the founding of parties should be to allow participation by as wide a group of people as possible and as wide a number of interests as is possible. I have a problem with INEC being able to operate under criteria which allow them to terminate the political participation of groups who are not in the mainstream, which is dangerous for a democracy in such a big country, and to be able to do so on the basis simply that they have not one particular electoral office. Seeking electoral office is not the only purpose of a political party. It's an organization of people who have the common ideology and ideas and who want to ventilate ideas within the polity, which may be successful at a future time. If they're going to be stamped out at this very early stage, then that is a problem fundamentally for our democracy. But back to the legal question, INEC has the power to do so. The courts, as usual, will be dragged into political contests and will be asked to determine whether the power which INEC has exercised is supported by facts on the ground. And even that contest, dragging the court into this question, creates very great problems for the credibility of the system of elections being administered in this country.
All right, taking it back to perhaps, Mr. Oyekomi there, seeing what the senior advocate has talked about, it almost seems to infer that based on our democratic rights, that it might be unconstitutional. And then saying again that you've done a constitutional thing. But maybe what I'm going to ask you is what some might consider a soft question, and that is, INEC has deregistered, but should they, seeing as that there is the freedom of expression, freedom of association, there's also enshrined in the Constitution?
Thank you very much. Essentially, I don't think INEC is the right institution to be tackled over whether the space is being expanded or being contracted. we should all return to the National Assembly, because the National Assembly made the fault alteration. What INEC simply did was to give effect to that. So we are not there to join issues about whether or not the laws were properly made, or about the propriety of the law, about whether or not it will exclude some people from participating. And I think that the conversation can still be carried forward. If people are so aggrieved, it is our National Assembly, they are our representatives. Nigerians should go back to the National Assembly to now say, well, you have made this fault alteration, then these are things that are wrong with it. You need to change it.
We're going to continue.
As an institution, we are not permitted to debate or analyze all these things. We just give effect.
We're going to continue the discussion. Let's quickly go on a break. Mr. Galadima, Mr. Candidate Johnson. Still to come also, what more do we know about the brief of the Economic Advisory Council to President Buhari? Details when we return. Welcome back. But first to some of your stories in brief. We begin with maintenance of internal safety, protection of lives and property, also improving the ease of doing business as major targets set by the federal government for security reasons. And to achieve them, the Commandant General of the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps, they've inaugurated agro ranges in Benue State as a viable solution to the herders and farmers conflict, appealing to the state government to support the initiative. A call Governor Samuel Ortom said is well received. Elsewhere, in Kaduna State High Court, they set aside the 24th and 25th for the commencement of trial of the leader of the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, Sheikh Ibrahim El-Zakzaki, and his wife Zainab. El-Zakzaki and his wife are facing an 8-count charge of culpable homicide, unlawful assembly, disruption of the public peace, among others, filed by the state government. At the resumed hearing of the suit against the defendants today, Justice Gideon Kurada amended the charges and excluded 2 other accused persons still at large to enable the trial commence without delay. Counsel to Mr. El-Zakzaki, Mr. Falana, laments the incessant adjournments of the case, which he says is affecting the health and comfort of his clients. Well, staying with the issue of deregistration of political parties, we've been talking to the national chairman of one of the deregistered political parties, Allied Congress Party of Nigeria, Mr. Ganiyu Galadima, also Chief Press Secretary to the INEC chairman, Mr. Rotimi Oyekanmi, and also Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Emi Candidate Johnson, joining us from Skype. This question is to you, Mr. Galadima, considering all that you've heard from the INEC chairman, also that is his representative with us, Mr. Oyekanmi, and indeed the SAN. Wouldn't you say perhaps that 91 political parties is a little too much? And the position that INEC is in, are you planning to go to court? What's the next line of action for the ACPN?
Well, as I want to say, that 91 political parties is not too much for Nigeria. Going by the largeness of our people, Nigeria is over 200 million people democracy. If a small country like Republic of Benin can have over 100 political parties, Benin Republic is up to a state in Nigeria. Even with the leading democracy in the world, America has over 200 political parties. You see, forming a political party is not just to win election. If you are insisting that parties must win election, that means you are invariably asking people to go to the field and win at all costs, which is not good for democracy. Forming a political party is ideological. And I want to tell you that some of us have emotional attached to the political parties we have. We have set up machinery in motion, and after this program, I think we have an appointment with a team of lawyers to determine the next course of action. We are definitely going to challenge this in court. Despite the fact that we are already in court, we are the Supreme Court with INEC. Why can't INEC wait for the case at the Supreme Court to be disposed of before deregistering the party? Besides, we met all the conditions, we met all the criteria. We will definitely challenge the action in court.
All right, finally to you, Mr. Candidate Johnson, what are your thoughts? What do you see happening, or what do you think should happen, seeing as this is also a matter you mentioned before that will be taken to court?
Thank you again. I think Mr. Oyekami is correct that the law has been passed and their job is not to decide whether it's right or whether it's properly effective or whether it opens or closes the political space. He's right in that aspect. They must follow the law. Mr. Galadima is also quite right that the issue is one that is beyond the question of law. It's about political participation. Any electoral law, any law to register political parties must be based on the philosophy of political participation, which a particular country espouses. I'm not so sure whether from this law it is clear that the Nigerian government and the Nigerian environment supports the free expression of the widest number of its people, which is one fundamental of the democratic process. So if that is the position, it brings us to the importance of people following their law, holding their representatives accountable for what they want. If your representatives can impose upon you a law which restricts your ability and force to express yourself in the political space, then that is a fundamental problem with the level of representation that we're receiving and the philosophy of the law that we're having legislated on our behalf. So that is a big problem. I think that problem is one that comes behind this question, this simple question of whether they perform the law. They've carried out the law. I think that there's a problem in constitutional and political and social context with a law that prevents the widest number of people in such a large country from expressing their own preferences and corrals them into large and unwieldy parties which may represent ideas that are violently offensive to their own sentiment and their conscience.
All right, we'd like to appreciate your time. Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Yemi Candidate Johnson, thank you for talking to us. Also, the National Chairman of the ACPN, Mr. Gani Galadima, and also Mr. Rotimi Oyekami, Chief Press Secretary to the INEC Chairman. Thank you for joining us at this time. The President has directed the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, that he should immediately address the lapses observed in the coordination between ministries and all agencies of government. The President's directive is part of suggestions from his economic advisory team, which presented its first report to him following their inauguration. President Buhari told them that the lack of synergy between ministries, departments, agencies will no longer be accepted, as everyone is working for the country and not for personal interest. The chairman of the Economic Advisory Team, Professor Doyin Salami, had called the attention of the president that the country's economic growth is slower than its rising population, while also sharing views on borrowing, macroeconomic stability, and the need to provide a friendly climate for foreign investment.
Take a look at I have received the executive summary of your first report, and I commend you, Mr. Chairman, and each member for your patriotism in agreeing to serve your country in this capacity. Thank you very much. The economy is the most delicate. The economy is the most delicate and sensitive of all aspects of national life. A little change in the inputs in the metrics can lead to major disruptions in the national economy. For Nigeria, international changes in oil prices, bad harvests, conflicts in strategic global locations, a global pandemic like we are experiencing now with coronavirus, tariff changes in major world economies, to mention only a few examples that readily came to mind, can significantly affect our own plans and fortunes. In the circumstances, I cannot overemphasize the importance of your task. I am highly pleased, based on what I have read in your executive summary of the depth and painstaking thoroughness of your preliminary report. This bodes well as you properly get to grips with complexities of the economy and came up with options for policy direction.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari. Well, that's our program this afternoon. Many thanks for watching. I'm Millicent Nwaka.